Hello and thanks for joining me. My name is Nick. I'm a senior developer for Pronova Technologies. And in today's video, we're going to cover the IP configuration, firewall configuration, and just general networking information about the PNT database engine program. With the program up and running here from our previous videos, we can see here that in the server IP address field, we have the IP address of our test VM here. And this IP address here is pre-populated from the network interface of the device. Best recommendations for your IP address for the PNT database engine is to set it as a static IP address. And in this case, it's just generic Windows. We would go through here to the adapter to properly configure that. By right-clicking on our network here, or clicking on Start menu and going to Network, will bring us to the network status. This here is Windows Server 2022. So depending on your operating system, the functionality here might be different, but the end result to assign the static IP address will be similar. You want to get to your adapter options, which you can access also from the control panel here. If we go to small icons, again we got the network and sharing section here. And from here, we have change adapter settings. So there's multiple ways to get to the adapter settings, as you can see here. And once we're there, we'll just right-click on our adapter. You may have multiple if you have wireless, etc., multiple NIC cards on the device. In this case, we only have the one here. By going into Property, we can go to our IPv4 here, or the IPv6 if that's what you're using, and go ahead and set it a static IP address. In this case, we're just going to keep the generic that the device, well actually we'll change it to .200, so it's outside of the DHCP auto issue range. And our subnet mask is just class C, just most normal home router design stuff like that's always just a class C or 255.255.255.0. This could be different, so make sure you have that information based on your network specs. And then our router is just going to be static there. We're not going to worry about DNS. Our server does not need DNS for the PNT program to work, so we're just going to leave that blank for now. Actually, in this case, I'm just going to set it to our router as well. You can also just use Google if you want to. Not recommended, but you can use it as an option. With that said, our static IP address is now different, and I will have to reconnect my RDP session here, and I will, and be back with you in a moment. Okay, so I reconnected my RDP session to the new IP address. And if we double click on our network adapter here and go to details, we can see now that we're pulling our new static IP address. I'll go ahead and close out of all these windows here, and we'll notice that on our PNT program we're going to see here that the IP address does not match the local IP. It's no longer 110, it is now 200. It's recommended to have the static IP set before you install the program, but if you already had the program installed and need to change the IP address, you can do so here. In this case, we'll change it to 200, and then we will have to restart. So in this case, since we changed the IP address, what we're going to want to do is uninstall the service and reinstall it to make sure it works properly, and you can do so just by clicking this button here. Again, this will take down the service. Any of this stuff here will take down the service, so make sure this is all done before you have any end users connecting to the database. Okay, so we see that stopped. Let me see that the service is uninstalled. Then we go ahead and just click reinstall here. Give it a second to refresh. We see it's installed. We'll see if the service, sometimes it'll start automatically like it did there. If not, you would just click the start service here. With that up and running, we're just going to refresh our log. And here we can see where we stopped it from doing the uninstall. And then after it reinstalled and started, we can see the transmitters came back up. If we do another refresh here, we'll see that we have no errors. And perfect. Our PNT database engine is now running on the new static IP address of .200. And we recommend using static so that way your end users connecting to it, it will not change. One of the fun things about the PNT database engine is it does utilize up to 4-layer encryption. employee record information, stuff like that. The sensitive data is using 4-layer encryption, so it's very secure. And then all the rest of the traffic is also using encryption for all communications, so it's secure to utilize across the internet if you like. When it comes to using it across the internet, that's where we come to our next section, which is the firewall. In this case, we're on Windows. You could also have, a firewall appliance, network appliance that you would have to configure these on, depending on your company network infrastructure, anything like that. In this case, we just have our server set in a DMZ zone, so it's just fully exposed out there. And what I would recommend for that is we're going to go to Firewall, and we'll just utilize the Windows Firewall for all our functionality here. I'm going to go ahead and expand that. We'll go to Inbound here, and you'll see when we install the program, it actually set up 6 firewall rules for us. Ports 50, 126, 125, and 124, both UDP and TCP. These are the 6 firewall rules required for the PNT program to work. It sets them up individually just in case, so it's more informative. You could also create one rule for TCP, one rule for UDP, and just do a range, but in this case we like to point out all the information on the ports that's utilized, so each one has its own rule created for it. Go to Outbound, we'll also see those rules there as well. Now if we really wanted to secure our server, what we would do is just go in here, right click, go to I apologize, we're going to click on this part here and go to Properties on the Windows Defender Firewall. On the outbound connections, our default setting is just to allow all. So if a rule is not defined, it's just going to allow the traffic. If a rule is defined, if the rule is set to allow, it's going to allow it. Unless the rule specifically denies it, all outbound traffic is going to be allowed. In my case, for my video, the only thing I want to do is for my RDP session, and you could always use different ports and everything. This is kind of where you can get really customizable on some of your stuff. I'm going to just set up my RDP port here for me for my screen share here, and I'm just going to say RDP for now. Normally you want more information, be specific, so you looking at the rule later, you know what it's used for, what it does, functionalities, etc., etc. So with my RDP one set up, now the only ones I'll need are these up here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just delete the rest of these, because right now our firewall's set to allow all these ones to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and we're just going to delete these. Perfect. That leaves us with just the ones used for the program. Now again, the outbound, once again, according to the properties here, and you got one for each domain, private and public. You want to make sure they're configured similar or appropriately based on your network environment. The outbound is always set to allowed. So even though I only have 6 firewall rules here on the outbound, it's allowing all traffic essentially that's not defined in here out. And in a truly secure environment, you really want to just lock it down to what's truly needed. In this case, this server is literally going to be running only the PNT database engine, so I only want to allow these. It may be a specific RDP port, and the RDP port is a risk in itself too, so you want to lock it down with an IP address, and we'll show you that here in a little bit as well. One of the things I'm going to do here is go ahead and add another rule in here for the RDP for outbound, as I will be blocking all outbound, so that way I can keep more control of it. I do apologize, it's not 3089, it's 3389 is the generic RDP port, so I'll have to update my one here. In this case, I'm going to say allow, not block. Right here is where you can specify your domain private or public. In this case, I want to apply it to all 3. You could individually say only domain or private, which means internet communication, public, which would be outbound worldwide. In this one here, I'm just going to say RDP. And that was 3389, so I got to go back to my inbound rule here. And I will need to fix that in here. Just by double clicking it, I can go back to my protocols here and set that to the correct 3389. With that set, I can go ahead and just delete all these other rules in here. And again, this will vary depending on what you're using. This is for true PNT database engine only kind of environment. So we're literally only allowing transmission for our PNT database engine. With this being done, as you can see right now, everything else inbound is blocked, yet I still have a good connection to the server. I'm also going to come back to our Windows Defender here. At this point, since I have my RDP set up so I don't lose connection, I'm going to go ahead and say block on all of these. So if a rule is not defined, I want it just to block it. The only ones I want to allow are the ones I create the rules for. And there we go. With our RDP in there and our PNT database engine ports in there, we are officially locked down to where the server only functions for RDP, remote desktop, and the PNT database engine program. One other thing recommended to further restrict your RDP is you're going to want to set a scope to allow specific IP addresses. What this will do here is make it so that whatever device I'm connecting to it from will only allow that connection. So this is a way to further restrict RDP access to further increase your security on your system. With a RDP open, anyone that gets your password could essentially log into this, but if we restrict the IP address here, we can then make it so that it only allows us to RDP in from a specific IP address, further locking down your system. And you could do a range here as well. In this case, we'll go ahead and do a range. Basically, we're going to do like a whole subnet, and we'll just do our local subnet, since I'm connecting to it locally, not outside the world. So in this case, I'm just going to do 10.0.0.1/24. And the /24 stands for your subnet. We're class C, so a 255.255.255.0. With this in there, that's going to say that anybody inside our network can RDP into the server. It's more secure, it keeps the world from gaining access to it, and allows only local access to it. We'll go ahead and click OK there, and apply. And we can tell I still have my RDP session. So if you do that incorrect, my remote desktop connection to the server would have disconnected. And we're also going to apply that for the outbound, just to really top off security for it. One other thing you can do to further lock down your RDP firewall rule here is inside the scope. We can also define a local IP address as well, so that that defines just our server. In this case, we'll do the same where it's 0.0.1/24. So just we're basically locking it down to our local IP address on the communication, so that they have to be within the domain. So that way, if the server for some reason pulls an IP address out of this domain and stuff as well, it won't communicate. So it just kind of further helps increase security. More so for the inbound, I should say. Outbound, we can also do the same thing as well. Go ahead and do 10.0.0.1/24. Okay. And there we go. So now we're going to specify that the local IP address has to be within the network, and the remote IP address has to be within the network as well. So another additional method to further increase your security on the RDP port. So one other thing I would like to point out as well, in this tutorial video we're doing a 10.0.0 subnet. Yours will be different depending on your network configuration, your router, modem, etc. The best way to know which one you're going to use for the /24 network, if you're going to go that route, is based on your IP address. So if you come back to, for example, on Windows Server 2022, go back to Control Panel and look at our network sharing and go to our adapter. By looking at, double-clicking that and going to details here, our IP address, basically our subnet defined by our router, is the 10.0.0. You could see a 192.168.0 range of different subnets. So that's what you would put in here for the remote address filtering stuff for our RDP port. So if yours is 192.168.0, you would do, instead of 10.0.0, 192.168.0.0/24. And again, that's only if you're working with the RDP. All this RDP stuff is off topic. It's more for our remote sessions. So, and there we go. Our system is now extremely secure. We've locked down RDP even though this server is in a DMZ zone. The only IP address that can RDP into it is going to be from this subnet, our 10.0.0 local intranet. That'll help prevent people from outside the world gaining RDP access to it. Again, if you can have physical access to the server, if you want maximum security, you would disable this as well, delete it, and have physical access to the device for a more true security on it. But with that being said, these ports are active, and inside the Windows Defender Firewall configuration here, we have it set to block by default all rules that aren't specified. And we don't have DNS, so now on the server, if we try to go to like internet, just try to go to portal, we're going to see that it's not going to do anything because our firewall is blocking that. So if you still want to have some internet access with this kind of configuration for your server, you will have to add a couple more outbound rules since we told it to block everything. In this case, we'll go ahead and define that right now. We'll go to ports. We're going to specify, and you can specify multiple with commas. So we're going to say port 80 for internet, 443 for SSL internet. The DNS port is going to be port 53. And sometimes some require UDP as well as TCP, so you'll have to kind of experiment with that. For now, we'll just try the TCP and see what we get. We're going to say allow. We're going to allow for all three. This is a member server, it's not on a domain or anything like that, so we're just going to say, private, public, everything for this case. And in here, we'll just go ahead and, again, be very specific, detailed on your naming and description so you understand what they are when you look at them later. In this case, I'm just going to say web, SSL, and DNS. And this is just for the outbound that we're creating here. And we can see here that we're still getting an error on it. And if we do CMD, let's go ahead and do ping google.com, see if the DNS resolves correctly. And it couldn't. So our DNS is still not set up 100%. And the reason for that is DNS, I believe, primarily uses UDP. So we'll need to create one more firewall rule here in our outbound. And for this case, UDP is utilized sometimes for speed. So we're going to just kind of include a UDP one for the similar ports. So 80, 443, again 80 is web, unsecure, 443 is used for SSL web pages, and then our port 53 for DNS. And we're doing UDP because we already have the TCP ones enabled. And additionally, I would say here UDP ports, web, SSL, and DNS. And again, for this, we're just being kind of brief. On your end, you want to be as descriptive as possible. So now we have our UDP protocol and TCP protocols. Now if we go back here and test, voila. So now we have access. And if we go to bring up our command prompt just to do a simple test, ping google.com, we're getting a general failure because ping can utilize a different port. However, we did notice that the pinging of the google.com did resolve to an IP address, so our DNS resolution is working successfully. With that being said, we are officially at this point able to go through and re-download programs as needed. Of course, we have to sign in for it. And we can see that we're still able to download programs and utilize the web page as needed. So with these simple firewalls rules here, we've really restricted our firewall on the Windows device to really secure it, also allowing the main ports needed for the PNT database engine. With that being said, everything at this point should be up and operational 100% on the firewall standpoint. You don't necessarily have to go through and touch all these firewall rules. We just like to cover it for additional security. A lot of these configurations in here are kind of advanced technical knowledge as far as ports, protocols, stuff like that. If you want to dive into it, awesome. Learn all you can. In this case, we just wanted to present probably one of the more secure firewall configurations for the server. Again, to top it off on security, you would get rid of RDP. But in our case, we can't because we need RDP to connect to our server, so we have to have that in there. So we just further restrict the remote IP addresses that can connect to it to further increase security for us. And then, of course, password. Your users for this server or device, keep the passwords really long, complex. The more the better. And be sure to limit your end user's access to the server, because on the C drive, all your data is inside these SQL files here. Now, employee data and stuff like that's a 4-layer encryption, so even inside the database, you'll see jumbled mess. They won't be able to decipher it. However, other unprotected data, such as orders from the PNT ERP system, stuff like that, those are in there as just normal data. So if you have access to the database, you have access to get the data out of it. But sensitive information such as employee records and pay and stuff like that, that's encrypted further inside the database files. With that being said, so that covers the IP address static assignment and firewall security recommendations for the program. Now, with the firewall rules enabled here for the outbound, as long as this server or device has a public IP address and my network, router, or firewall is configured correctly, I can access this server externally. So say my public IP address, one way you can do that, I can't do it for the video because we can't show our public IP address, but you can simply go to google.com and type in what's my IP address, and that'll give you your public facing. The one thing you'll need though is a static or a DNS record to route. This IP address here will never be set to your public facing IP. This is always going to be your NIC card IP address. With the firewall rules configured correctly, the PNT ERP software and stuff can access it regardless across the internet. And it is encrypted. All traffic from the PNT, any PNT programs to the PNT database engines is encrypted. So you can just let it have access across the network, and the response time communication is actually fairly impressive so far based on a lot of our testing. So you can utilize this program both internally in your intranet or externally across the internet. So a lot of good functions, a lot of good features. And of course, in the future updates, there'll be a lot more to come. But that's basically it for the IP address, the firewall configurations, and some security recommendations. Thanks for joining me.